It was almost 2 in the morning in Tokyo when the phone rang. I am a senior corporate fraud investigator, which means my internal clock is permanently broken, and my default state of mind is a mild, analytical suspicion of everything. I was sitting in my hotel room, 22 floors above the glowing neon pulse of Shibuya, scrolling through a digital mountain of falsified expense reports for a client. The air conditioning was humming a steady, quiet rhythm. My coffee had gone cold 3 hours ago. I was exhausted, but it was the good kind of exhaustion, the kind that comes from doing your job perfectly. When my personal phone buzzed on the nightstand, I assumed it was an emergency. Nobody calls at that hour unless something is on fire. I glanced at the caller ID. It was Arthur. Arthur is a retired high school history teacher, a 72-year-old widower, and the only neighbor I had trusted with my phone number when I bought my property in northern Idaho. I answered on the second ring, my mind immediately shifting from corporate embezzlement to the quiet pine forests of Priest Lake. I said hello, keeping my voice low and steady. Arthur's voice came through the speaker, and it had that specific, careful hesitation that older men get when they are trying very hard not to be a burden, but know they have to tell you something bad. He asked if I was awake. I told him I was in Japan, so I was very much awake, and asked him what was going on. He cleared his throat. He said he did not want to be a busybody, but there was a lot of activity at my place. He said the lights were blazing. All of them. He told me he had counted 6 cars parked in the driveway and along the shoulder of the gravel road. And there was music. Loud, thumping country music echoing across the water. I felt my stomach drop out of my body. It did not just sink, it plummeted straight through the floor of that Tokyo hotel room. For a fraction of a second, the primitive part of my brain screamed. My house. My quiet, secret sanctuary. I asked him if anyone was outside. Arthur said it looked like there were people on the wraparound deck. He offered to walk over there with his flashlight to check it out, maybe tell them they had the wrong address. I stopped him immediately. I told him absolutely not to go over there. I told him not to approach the house, not to step foot on the driveway, and not to let anyone see him. I asked him to just stay on the line with me for a second. I did not panic. Panic is a luxury for people who have someone else to fix their problems. When you have spent your entire life as the designated problem solver, the family ATM, and the emotional dumping ground, you do not panic. You assess. You verify. You gather the data. I put Arthur on speakerphone, swiped out of my audit spreadsheets, and opened the encrypted cloud security application on my phone. I had 7 high-definition smart cameras installed around that property. I had paid a premium for the kind of night vision that could read a license plate in the pitch black. I tapped the icon for the driveway camera first. It took 3 seconds to buffer. When the feed loaded, the cold, professional detachment I used to survive my career slammed into a wall of deeply personal reality. There they were. I recognized the vehicles instantly. There was the heavy-duty black Ram truck that belonged to my brother-in-law, Trevor. Parked right behind it was the silver Buick sedan my mother drove. Next to that, angled carelessly across the grass I had just paid to have reseated, was the white SUV that belonged to my older sister, Maya. There were 3 other vehicles I did not recognize, a minivan and 2 sedans, but the core trio was all I needed to see. My pulse leveled out. The initial shock evaporated, leaving behind a sensation that was entirely different. It was an absolute, crystalline stillness. I was thousands of miles away, staring at a screen, watching the people who shared my DNA occupy the one space on Earth I had built specifically to escape them. I did not scream. I did not cry. I just watched. I switched the camera feed from the driveway to the front door. The porch lights were on, casting a harsh glare. Taped to my expensive, custom-stained wooden door frame were balloons. Pink and white balloons, bobbing in the night breeze. Above the door, pinned awkwardly into the wood siding, was a large, cheaply printed vinyl banner. The resolution on the camera was sharp enough that I could pinch and zoom to read the text perfectly. It said, "Welcome to the new house, Maya and Trevor." I stared at those words for a long time. I want to explain what happened in my chest in that moment, because there is a profound difference between rage and clarity. Rage is loud. Rage makes you want to throw your phone against the wall, book the next flight home, kick the door open, and scream until your vocal cords bleed. But clarity is the moment immediately after the loud part dies down. Clarity is when you sit very still, your mind working at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and you realize that you have been handed the perfect opportunity to end a war you have been fighting your entire life. You just have to be smart enough not to make a single move you will have to undo later. I switched to the camera I had hidden inside the house. It was a tiny lens tucked onto the top shelf of the built-in bookcase in the living room, disguised behind a stack of hardcover novels. It had a sweeping, wide-angle view of the entire open-concept living area and the kitchen. The room was packed. I counted at least 20 people. Right in the middle of my living room, standing on the expensive, cream-colored area rug I had saved up for, was my sister, Maya. She was holding a flute of my champagne I had bought to celebrate my first solo night in the house. She was wearing a ridiculous paper sash draped over her shoulder that said something illegible in glittery letters. She was laughing, tossing her head back, playing the perfect, gracious host. Her 3 kids were there, too. They were running laps around my coffee table, and the youngest one, a terror of a child who had never been told the word no, was actively jumping on my brand-new sofa with her shoes on. I moved my eyes to the kitchen. My mother, Helen, was sitting at my kitchen island. She was drinking red wine out of one of my hand-painted ceramic mugs, presumably because she had already gone through all the proper wine glasses. She looked entirely comfortable, chatting with a woman I recognized vaguely as Trevor's mother. And then there was Trevor. My brother-in-law was standing at my quartz countertops, using my heavy, professional-grade wooden cutting board, the one I had oiled and seasoned by hand, to carve a massive slab of barbecued meat. I watched a drop of dark, greasy sauce fall off the knife and pool on the pristine white counter. It was a violation so complete, so breathtakingly arrogant, that it almost felt orchestrated for a movie. They were not just trespassing. They had moved in. They were throwing a housewarming party for themselves in a house I had paid $462,000 for. I took a breath. I pressed the screen record button on my phone, capturing the live feed. I took screenshot after screenshot. The banner. Maya's face. Trevor scratching my cutting board. My mother drinking my wine. I documented everything with the same methodical precision I used when compiling evidence against corporate executives who thought they could hide their offshore accounts from me. Arthur was still on the line. I could hear his steady breathing. He asked me if I was still there, if I saw what was happening. He asked if it was my family, because he recognized the sister from a photo I had accidentally shown him once. I looked at the screen. I looked at Maya acting like she owned the walls I had paid for with my blood and sweat. "It's a break-in, Arthur," I said, my voice completely flat. "That is what it is." "Arthur," I said, keeping my tone carefully measured. "I need you to do exactly what I say, and I need you to do it right now." He said he was ready. I told him to call the Bonner County Sheriff's Department. Not the emergency line, but the dispatch number. I rattled off the digits from memory because I had memorized them the day I closed on the property. I told him to report a breaking and entering at my address. "Tell them the homeowner is currently out of the country on business," I instructed. "Tell them you are observing 20+ unauthorized individuals inside the residence. Tell them the homeowner is requesting immediate police presence to clear the property." Arthur hesitated. I could hear the friction of his thumb rubbing against the phone receiver. "Audrey, honey," he said gently. "I know that's your sister down there. If I call the cops, they're going to show up with lights and sirens. Are you absolutely sure you want to do this? You don't want to try calling her first? Sort it out family to family?" I stared at the camera feed. Maya was now pouring more of my champagne for a guest I did not even know. "Arthur," I replied, and the chill in my own voice surprised even me. "I do not have a sister. I have a home invader. Please make the call. And Arthur? Do not mention the word family to dispatch. Just tell them there are intruders." He said he understood. He promised to call me back the second the cruisers arrived. I hung up the phone. I did not pause to process the emotional weight of what I had just done. I opened my contacts and dialed Victoria. Victoria is a razor-sharp real estate and property dispute attorney based out of Coeur d'Alene. I had retained her services when I bought the house, specifically because she had a reputation for being ruthless. She was expensive, and she was worth every penny. It was late on a Saturday night in Idaho, so her call went to an answering service. I told the operator it was a priority emergency for Audrey. 9 minutes later, my phone rang. "Audrey," Victoria said. Her voice was crisp, entirely devoid of sleep. "What's the situation?" "I have an active home invasion at the Lakehouse," I said. "My sister, my brother-in-law, my mother, and about 20 of their friends have broken into the property. They are currently throwing a housewarming party for my sister, claiming the house is hers." Victoria was silent for exactly 2 seconds. The sound of a legal mind shifting gears is almost audible if you know how to listen for it. "Are you safe?" she asked first. "I'm in Tokyo," I said. "I'm watching them right now on my interior security cameras. The neighbor has just dispatched the sheriff." "Okay," Victoria said. "You're in a one-party consent state for recording, and it is your private domicile. Have they caused any visible damage yet?" I glanced back at the feed. The youngest child, the 4-year-old, was currently dragging what looked like a permanent blue marker across the drywall in the hallway leading to the guest bedrooms. "Yes," I said. "Property damage is actively occurring." "Perfect," Victoria said, and she actually sounded a little thrilled. "Do not contact them tonight. Do not answer if they call you. Let the deputies make first contact and establish the official record. I want you on the fastest flight back to the States. I am going to draft a no trespass order right now, and I will have it ready to file with the court the second they open on Monday morning." She paused. "Audrey, are you prepared to press criminal charges?" I looked at the screen. My mother was laughing, leaning back in my dining chair, completely at ease in a house she had contributed $0 and zero effort toward. "Yes," I said. "All of them?" Victoria asked. "Or just the sister?" I closed my eyes. The hotel room suddenly felt very cold. "All of them," I said. "Including my mother." "Understood," Victoria said. "Get a flight. I'll handle the paperwork." I hung up the phone. I opened my laptop, closed the fraud investigation files for my client, and opened a new browser tab to book a flight out of Narita Airport. My hands were perfectly steady. The family thought I would react like the broken, compliant daughter they had raised. Instead, I was reacting like the corporate fraud investigator I had become. To understand how a woman can sit in a hotel room in Japan and calmly send the police to arrest her own mother and sister, you have to understand the mathematics of our family. It was never about love. It was about resource allocation. And in our house, I was the resource. We grew up in a modest, cramped house in the suburbs of Boise. My father died when I was young, leaving behind nothing but a 1996 pickup truck and $700 in a checking account. My mother, Helen, had to work long hours to keep the lights on. I understand the hardship she faced. I do. But hardship does not excuse the system she built to survive it. In our family, there was a fundamental rule: whatever belonged to me, belonged to Maya. I was the younger sister, the quiet one, the one who didn't cause trouble. Maya was loud, demanding, and constantly in a state of manufactured crisis. And my mother's philosophy was simple: give the squeaky wheel whatever it wants so it stops making noise, even if you have to steal the grease from the other wheel. It started with small things. When I was 16, I spent an entire summer babysitting the neighborhood kids. I saved every dollar. I kept my cash in a shoebox under my bed. At the end of August, I bought myself a used, bright red bicycle. I loved that bike. I washed it, oiled the chain, and kept it in the garage. 3 days after I bought it, I came home from school and the bike was gone. I found out later that Maya, who was 21 at the time, had taken it without asking because she needed to get to a friend's house across town. She didn't bring it back. She left it on a stranger's lawn, and it was stolen. When I cried, when I begged my mother to make Maya pay me back, my mother just sighed, rubbing her temples. "Audrey, please," she had said. "It's just a bicycle. Your sister is going through a hard time right now. Why are you being so selfish? We are family. We share." That was the word. Selfish. It was the weapon they used to keep me in line. When I was 20, I got my first real corporate internship. With my signing bonus, I bought a used Toyota Corolla. It wasn't much, but it was mine. A year later, I was sent out of state for a grueling 6-month training program. I left the car parked at my mother's house for safekeeping. I left her a spare key just in case she needed to move it for street sweeping. Halfway through my training, I got a notification from my insurance company about a change in the policy. I called the DMV. The car was no longer in my name. My mother had forged my signature on the title transfer. She had signed the car over to Trevor, Maya's new husband, because his truck had broken down and Maya was pregnant with her first child and needed reliable transportation. I remember standing in the hallway of my corporate housing, gripping the phone, feeling the air leave my lungs. I called my mother. I was screaming. I threatened to call the police for grand theft auto. And then came the guilt tripping, the crying, the manipulation. Audrey, how could you do this to your pregnant sister? To your niece? Trevor needs to get to work. You're away at training, you don't even need the car right now. If you call the cops, you will destroy this family. I will never forgive you. I broke. I was 21, desperate for my mother's approval, terrified of being the villain in the family narrative. I let it go. I told myself it was just a car. I told myself I was helping. But looking back, the bicycle and the Corolla were not isolated incidents. They were a blueprint. My mother had taught Maya a very valuable lesson. Audrey's boundaries do not exist. Audrey will complain. Audrey might even yell, but ultimately, Audrey will submit if you press the family button hard enough. They trained me to be the perfect victim of their financial and emotional abuse. They conditioned me to believe that my success only had value if it could be harvested to subsidize Maya's failures. And for a very long time, I let them. For the next 15 years, I worked like a machine. I had to, because I was essentially funding 2 lives, my own and the emergency buffer for Maya's constant disasters. I became a corporate fraud investigator. I studied late into the night, passed my certifications on the first try, and clawed my way into a senior position at a major consulting firm. The job demanded brutal hours. I was working 80-hour weeks, flying across the country to audit corrupt companies, living out of suitcases, and surviving on hotel coffee and adrenaline. I made excellent money, but you wouldn't know it by looking at me. For 6 years, I split a tiny, drafty 1-bedroom apartment with a colleague just to keep my rent under $900 a month. I slept on a pull-out couch. I packed my lunch every single day. While my coworkers were booking destination weddings in Tulum or buying luxury cars, I was taking on extra case files and working double shifts. I didn't get my nails done. I didn't buy designer clothes. Every spare dollar I earned was funneled into a high-yield savings account. I was building a wall of financial security so high that no one could ever make me feel as helpless as I felt when they stole my car. Meanwhile, Maya's life was a masterclass in weaponized incompetence. She and Trevor were a black hole for money and responsibility. Trevor bounced from job to job, always having some grand excuse for why his managers didn't respect his vision. Maya had 3 kids in quick succession. And every time they failed, my phone rang. Audrey, the kids need dental work and Trevor's check bounced. It's just a loan. It was never a loan. Audrey, Maya's car needs a new transmission. How's she supposed to get the babies to preschool? You make so much money, it won't even make a dent for you. Audrey, Trevor lost his job again. They are going to be evicted. Please. For the children. Always the children. They used my nieces and nephews as human shields to deflect accountability. If I said no, I wasn't just saying no to Maya, I was starving innocent children. Or at least, that was the narrative my mother spun. Helen was the enabler-in-chief. She lived with Maya and Trevor, functioning as their unpaid nanny, and she constantly brokered their demands. I paid for braces. I paid for groceries. I paid past due utility bills so their heat wouldn't be shut off in December. I was an ATM running on blood, sweat, and lost youth. I remember one specific Tuesday. I was 28. I had just finished a grueling 48-hour audit in Chicago. I had dark circles under my eyes that looked like bruises. I was sitting in the airport, eating a stale sandwich, when Maya posted a photo on Facebook. It was her and Trevor holding massive margaritas on a beach in Florida. The caption read, "Much needed vacation. So blessed." I had just paid their electric bill 3 days prior. I stared at the photo. I didn't confront them. Confrontation required energy I simply did not possess. I just swallowed the anger, packed it down tight into a little box in my chest, and boarded my flight. When I say the Lakehouse was earned, I mean it in the most literal, agonizing sense of the word. I bought that house with the vacations I never took. I bought it with the sleep I never got. I bought it with the sheer, stubborn refusal to let them drain me dry entirely. Every dollar in that savings account was a piece of my freedom, painstakingly extracted from the wreckage of my family's entitlement. I was saving for an escape hatch. And as I crossed into my 30s, I realized I finally had enough to build it. The breaking point, the moment I truly, finally died as the good daughter, happened on a rainy afternoon in November. I had contracted a severe case of pneumonia after a brutal month of nonstop travel. I was 33, lying in my apartment with a fever of 103 degrees, coughing until my ribs felt like shattered glass. I hadn't eaten solid food in 2 days. I was physically incapable of walking to the kitchen to get a glass of water. My phone rang. It was my mother. I answered, my voice a ragged croak, hoping, just for a second, that she was calling to check on me. Maybe she would offer to bring over some soup. Maybe she would just act like a mother. "Audrey," she said, her voice brisk and annoyed. "Maya's credit card was declined at the mechanic. Trevor's truck needs new brake pads. Can you wire her $800 right now? They're stranded at the shop." I laid there staring at the ceiling. I could hear my own shallow, rattling breath in the quiet room. "Mom," I whispered. "I'm sick. I have pneumonia. I can't even sit up." There was a brief pause on the line. I waited for the sympathy. I waited for her to say, "Oh my God, honey, I'm so sorry. Forget about the truck, I'm coming over." Instead, she sighed. A heavy, burdened sigh. "Well, can you just do it from your phone? It will only take a second. Maya is really stressed out right now, Audrey. The kids are crying in the lobby of the garage." In that exact moment, something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud break, it was quiet, like a key turning the final lock on a heavy steel vault. I realized with absolute, terrifying clarity that if I were bleeding out on the floor, my mother's first instinct would be to check my pockets for Maya's allowance before calling an ambulance. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just hung up the phone. I turned it off. I went to sleep. When I woke up 2 days later, the fever had broken, and so had my allegiance to my family. I decided it was time. I had enough money saved. I started looking for properties far away from Boise. I looked in northern Idaho, up near Priest Lake. It was beautiful, isolated, and most importantly, it was an 11-hour drive from Maya and my mother. I found a property. 3 bedrooms, a wraparound deck overlooking the water, a private dock that needed a little work, and a stand of towering pine trees that smelled like Christmas Eve. The asking price was $462,000. I bought it entirely in cash, bypassing the need for a mortgage approval that might leave a paper trail. I told nobody. And when I say nobody, I mean it. That secrecy was deliberate, surgical, and absolute. I knew that if my family found out I had purchased a luxury vacation home while they were struggling to pay for groceries, they would descend on it like locusts. They would demand keys. They would invite themselves up for the summer. They would tell me I was selfish for not letting the kids use the lake. So, I ran a ghost campaign. I hired Victoria, the attorney, to set up a limited liability company. I purchased the house under the name of the LLC, so my personal name would not appear on public county property tax records. I rented a P.O. box in a neighboring town to handle all the mail, utility bills, and legal documents. I scrubbed my social media accounts, deleting anything that could reveal my location. I told my mother I was moving out of my shared apartment and renting a small, overpriced studio near the airport. It was the perfect, boring lie. A small studio sounded like a financial downgrade, which meant they wouldn't ask for details, and they definitely wouldn't want to visit. I was building a fortress, and I was making sure they couldn't even see the walls. The closing was in May. I moved in slowly, meticulously, across the month of June. I didn't hire movers. Movers leave a paper trail. Movers gossip. Instead, I drove up on my days off, bringing one carload of my life at a time. A box of books. My professional clothes. A set of heavy blue ceramic bowls I had owned since college. I furnished the house through sheer grit and anonymity. I bought a queen-size bed off a couple in Spokane who were retiring and moving to Arizona. I paid cash. I found a massive, comfortable sectional sofa on Facebook Marketplace under a fake profile name and drove 40 miles in a rented cargo van to pick it up myself. I carried the pieces inside alone, sweating through my shirt, feeling the burn in my muscles. Every nail I hammered into those walls, every piece of furniture I dragged across the floor, felt like an act of reclamation. It felt like I was physically sewing my own skin back onto my body. I was building a sanctuary where the air belonged only to me. The first night I slept there, I stood out on the wooden deck at 11 o'clock at night. The air was crisp, smelling of damp earth and pine needles. The lake was a sheet of black glass under the moonlight. And then, far off in the distance, I heard the haunting, echoing call of a loon across the water. I had never heard one in person before. The sound was so pure, so wild and isolated, that I sat down on the deck boards and wept. Not loud crying, but the silent, heavy tears of a woman who had been running a marathon for 15 years and finally crossed the finish line. But I am a fraud investigator. My professional life is built on anticipating the worst behaviors of human beings. I knew that hope was not a strategy. I knew that secrets, especially in families like mine, have a way of rotting their way up to the surface. So, before I even brought the last box from my old apartment, I fortified the house. I changed all the exterior locks. I didn't just buy standard deadbolts. I installed commercial-grade smart locks on the front door, the back door, and the garage. These locks ran on digital keypads with rotating codes that I changed randomly every 2 weeks from my phone. Then came the cameras. People in the comment sections of my life might call me paranoid. I call it being prepared. I installed 7 high-definition cameras. 1 covering the driveway. 1 on the front porch. 1 sweeping the back deck and the dock. 1 in the garage. And, crucially, 3 hidden interior cameras covering the main entryways and the living room. All of the camera feeds were routed to an encrypted cloud server registered under a burner email address. I set up 2-factor authentication on everything. I went a step further. I had Victoria, my lawyer, place a flag on the county property records. If anyone attempted to file a change of address, request a copy of the deed, or pull permits on my property, I would be notified immediately. Finally, I introduced myself to Arthur, my neighbor. I brought him a tin of expensive butter cookies and a business card. I told him straight out, I live alone. I travel frequently for work. If you ever see anyone at this house, anyone at all, when my car is not in the driveway, do not assume they are a friend. Call me first and call the sheriff second. I did all of this not because I am crazy. I did this because I know exactly who Maya is. I know what my mother is capable of justifying. I built a digital and physical fortress because I knew that if they ever found my sanctuary, they would try to burn it down to keep themselves warm. And as I watched the camera feed from my hotel room in Tokyo months later, watching Trevor carve meat on my counter and Maya parade around my living room, I realized that my paranoia had not been paranoia at all. It had been prophecy. How did they get in? That was the question burning a hole in the back of my mind as I sat on the bullet train heading toward Narita Airport. My flight was boarding in 3 hours. I had packed my suitcase in under 10 minutes, moving with the cold, mechanical efficiency of a soldier breaking camp. As the Japanese countryside blurred past the window, I shifted into full investigative mode. I needed to reconstruct the timeline. A corporate audit requires you to trace the breach back to the source. A secure system had been compromised. I needed to know where the firewall failed. I opened my calendar app and scrolled back. June was clean. July. I stopped scrolling. A sickening wave of realization washed over me. In mid-July, I had been assigned to a massive audit case for a tech firm headquartered in Boise. It was a 5-day rotation. Because I was trying to bank as much cash as possible to pay for the new dock repairs at the Lakehouse, I made a tactical error. I made the mistake, and I will own this mistake for the rest of my life, of staying overnight at my mother's house instead of expensing a hotel room. It saved me $90. It ended up costing me my last shred of faith in humanity. I arrived at my mother's house exhausted. I had my heavy leather briefcase, the one I use for secure documents, and my personal tote bag. Inside my tote bag, zipped in a small interior pouch, was a backup physical key to the Lakehouse. Smart locks are excellent, but tech fails, batteries die, and Wi-Fi drops. You always keep a physical backup. Tucked right next to that key, folded into a neat square, was a copy of my recent property tax assessment that I had needed to review for my accountant. I remembered walking into my mother's house. Maya was there, supposedly doing laundry. I dropped my bags on the sofa in the living room, hugged my mother, and told them I desperately needed a shower before dinner. I take incredibly fast showers. It is a leftover habit from my early 20s when I shared a bathroom with 3 other interns. I was in the bathroom for exactly 4 minutes. I remember walking back out into the living room, rubbing a towel through my wet hair. Maya was sitting on the opposite end of the sofa, scrolling on her phone, looking entirely too innocent. I didn't think anything of it. But when I reached for my tote bag to get my phone charger, I noticed something. The zipper on the small interior pouch, the one holding the key and the tax document, was open about an inch. I had paused. I checked it immediately. Wallet, ID, corporate badge, keys, tax paper. Everything was there. Everything was in its place. I told myself I must have left the zipper partially open. I am a tidy person, but I am also a chronically tired person. I let it go. Sitting on the train in Japan, the memory clicked into place like a loaded magazine. She hadn't stolen the key. She hadn't stolen the paperwork. That would have been too obvious. I would have noticed, and I would have changed the locks immediately. Maya had gone through my bag the second she heard the shower water running. She had found the tax document with the Priest Lake address on it. She had found the physical key. She had taken her phone, snapped a crystal-clear photograph of the address, and then, in a move of calculated brilliance I almost had to respect, she had taken a close-up photograph of the physical key itself. In today's world, you do not need the physical metal to duplicate a key. There are dozens of apps and automated kiosks that can cut a perfect replica from a high-resolution photograph. She had copied my key digitally, put the original back in my bag, and zipped it up just as the water stopped running in the bathroom. For minutes. That was all it took for my own sister to breach the perimeter of my life. She had the address. She had the key. And she had the audacity to spend the next 2 months planning a housewarming party for a house she had never bought, waiting for the perfect window when she knew I was out of the country. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling slightly, not from sadness, but from the sheer, unadulterated adrenaline of a hunter who has finally spotted the wolf in the brush. They thought they had outsmarted me. They thought they could sneak into my life, plant their flag, and use the sheer social pressure of 20 party guests to force me into accepting it. They forgot what I do for a living. I don't get mad. I build a paper trail. And the trail they had just handed me was a straight shot to a felony conviction. I landed in Houston for my layover at 2:15 in the morning, their time. I had slept exactly 0 minutes on the 14-hour flight from Tokyo. My mind was a continuously running engine, processing variables, anticipating defenses, and building a timeline. As soon as the wheels touched the tarmac and the pilot cleared us to use cellular networks, my phone exploded. There were dozens of missed calls and frantic text messages, mostly from my mother and my sister. I did not open a single one. I swiped them away with my thumb and opened my messages to find the only one that mattered. It was a text from the deputy whose name Arthur had given me over the phone. It was brief and strictly professional. It read, "Report filed. Premises vacated by 11:40 on Saturday night. Photos and statements taken. Call me when you are stateside." I called him immediately from the empty terminal in Houston while waiting for my connection to Salt Lake City. His name was Deputy Onyekachi. When he answered, he sounded like a man who had seen far too much of the worst of human nature, but somehow still maintained a core of genuine empathy. I identified myself as the homeowner. He gave me the rundown. When he and 3 other deputies arrived at my property, they found 23 adults and 7 children inside the house. There were open containers of alcohol in every room. The music had been turned off, but the entitlement was still blaring. Then the deputy paused. I could hear the rustle of a notepad flipping over the phone line. He asked if he could ask me a personal question. I told him to go ahead. He asked if my sister had a habit of telling people that this was her house. I stopped walking. I stood in the middle of the fluorescent-lit airport corridor. I asked him exactly what he meant by that. Deputy Onyekachi explained that when law enforcement breached the party and ordered everyone to vacate, several of the guests became highly combative, not with the police, but with the concept that they were trespassing. 2 of the guests actually tried to argue with the deputies, claiming there must be a mistake in the dispatch system because Maya had told them she had just closed on the property a week ago. She had been hyping up this housewarming party for weeks. Some of the guests had even brought expensive gifts. There was a large box from a high-end home goods store sitting on my kitchen counter. The attached card read, "For your beautiful new home, Maya and Trevor." I felt a cold wave of absolute disbelief wash over me. I sank down onto the carpeted floor of the terminal, leaning my back against a cold glass window. The deputy wasn't finished. He told me that he was probably not supposed to share this detail, but he thought I needed to know what I was dealing with. One of the guests, a man who worked with my brother-in-law, had pulled a deputy aside. He was furious and embarrassed when he realized the police were dead serious. This man asked how to write a formal witness statement. He told the deputy that Maya and Trevor had not only claimed the house was theirs, but they had explicitly told him that Maya had inherited the property from our wealthy father. My father had been dead for 19 years. He had worked a blue-collar job until the day his heart gave out, and he had left us a beat-up 1996 pickup truck and $700. They had not just stolen my house for a weekend. They had stolen my entire reality. They had fabricated an alternative universe where my sweat, my 80-hour work weeks, and my 15 years of financial discipline were magically erased and reassigned to Maya as her divine birthright. I thanked the deputy. I told him I would be at the property by 6 o'clock that evening. I hung up the phone, picked up my bag, and walked toward my gate. I was not sad anymore. I was dangerous. I landed in Salt Lake City, picked up my car from the long-term parking lot, and began the drive north to Priest Lake. It is an 11-hour drive. I did not stop for food. I did not stop for coffee. I only stopped when the fuel gauge touched the red line. I had been awake for over 36 hours, but my body felt like it was humming with high-voltage electricity. I pulled into my gravel driveway at exactly 6:15 in the evening. The sun was beginning its slow descent over the pine trees, casting long, golden shadows across the property. It was breathtakingly beautiful, exactly the way I remembered it when I had driven away a week earlier. But as I turned off the engine, I just sat in the driver's seat for 2 full minutes. I had to mentally prepare myself for what was waiting behind that front door. I unlocked the smart deadbolt. I had already wiped the old codes from the system and issued a completely new sequence. The door swung open. The physical assault on my senses was immediate. The house smelled like stale beer, wet dog, cigarette smoke, and something distinctly burnt. The silence of the empty house only made the violation feel louder. I did not take off my shoes. I did not put down my bag. I pulled out my phone, opened the camera application, and began a methodical, room-by-room sweep. I was no longer a homeowner. I was a forensic auditor processing a crime scene. In the kitchen, there was dried pink frosting smeared across the edge of the quartz island. My heavy wooden cutting board, the one Trevor had been using, was sitting in a puddle of watermelon juice. They had left the rind on the wood overnight, and the expensive timber had warped and cracked down the center. In the sink, a precarious tower of my blue ceramic bowls was stacked haphazardly. 3 of them were visibly chipped. I walked down the hallway. The wall was covered in blue permanent marker. It looked like a child's crude drawing of a giraffe, surrounded by the word "Mommy" written 4 separate times. The white, plush area rug I had carefully selected for the living room had a massive, spreading dark red stain soaking into the fibers. Above the fireplace, the welcome banner was still hanging, sagging on one side where the cheap tape had given way. But the real damage was not structural. It was psychological. I walked into the primary bedroom. My sanctuary. The closet doors were wide open. Hanging on the rail, right next to my neatly pressed corporate suits, were my sister's cheap, brightly colored summer dresses. She had unpacked. On my vanity, her makeup bags were unzipped, powder spilled across the glass surface. I walked into the adjoining master bathroom. Someone had used my thick, white, luxury bath towel, the single expensive gift I had bought for myself when I closed on the house. It was left crumpled on the damp floor tiles like a discarded rag. On the nightstand next to my bed, Trevor's deodorant stick was sitting next to a half-empty can of light beer. I moved to the guest bedroom. This was the final nail in the coffin. My mother had taken this room. She had unpacked 4 complete outfits and hung them in the closet. She had brought her own orthopedic pillow. Her daily prescription medications were lined up in a neat row on the dresser. Next to the bedside lamp was a paperback romance novel with a bookmark wedged into chapter 3. They had not been visiting. They had not come up for a single night of partying. They had packed their bags, loaded their cars, and moved in. They fully intended to occupy the house until I eventually returned, at which point they would have used the sheer momentum of their physical presence to force me into letting them stay. I stood in the center of the hallway. I did not touch a single item. I did not clean the frosting. I did not pick up the towel. I documented every stain, every belonging, and every violation with a time-stamped photograph. Deputy Onyekachi arrived at the house at 7:30 that evening. The sun had finally set, leaving the house bathed in the harsh glare of the overhead lighting. When he stepped through the front door, he took off his hat and let out a low, heavy whistle as he surveyed the living room. I met him in the kitchen. I did not offer him a drink because I could not guarantee that any glass in the house was clean. We did the walkthrough together. He took his own official photographs while I pointed out the specific items of value that had been damaged or ruined. We cataloged the warped cutting board, the stained rug, the chipped ceramics, and the ruined drywall. When we got to the bedrooms, I showed him the clothes in the closets and the medications on the dressers. I explained to him that my family lived an 11-hour drive away. I explained that packing this volume of belongings and driving across state lines indicated a premeditated intent to establish residency. The deputy nodded slowly, jotting notes on his clipboard. We spent an hour bagging up the few items I was willing to call direct evidence. He handed me a card with the official case number printed on it, along with the names and badge numbers of the 4 deputies who had responded to the initial dispatch on Saturday night. We walked back out to the front porch. The night air was freezing, biting through my thin jacket, but I welcomed the cold. It kept me sharp. Deputy Onyekachi stopped on the top step. He turned to look at me, his expression shifting from professional detachment to something remarkably sincere. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and steady. "I have been working in law enforcement for a long time. I respond to family disputes, domestic disturbances, and property conflicts almost every single week. I want to tell you something, and I hope you remember it." I crossed my arms against the cold and nodded. "You did everything exactly right," he said. "Most people in your position, the first thing they do is call their sister. They scream, they cry, they try to talk it out. They try to fix it internally because it is family. And by the time they realize the other person is not going to listen, the intruder has already had hours, sometimes days, to build a story, manipulate the narrative, and hide the evidence. You skipped that step entirely. You bypassed the emotion and you went straight to the law. I do not see that very often. I want to tell you it was the right call. You protected yourself. I stared at him. The sheer validation in his words hit me harder than the sight of the ruined house. For my entire life, my family had told me I was the crazy one. I was the selfish one, the cold one, the one who overreacted. To hear an impartial officer of the law tell me that my boundaries were not just reasonable, but impeccably executed, broke the dam. I started crying. It was not a loud, dramatic breakdown. It was just a silent, steady stream of tears sliding down my exhausted face. I did not sob. I just stood there, letting the physical manifestation of 15 years of gaslighting wash out of my system. The deputy pretended not to notice. He reached into his chest pocket, casually pulled out a clean, folded tissue, and handed it to me without making eye contact. He tipped his hat, told me to lock the doors, and walked back to his cruiser. I went back inside. I could not bring myself to sleep in the primary bedroom. The thought of lying on the mattress where my sister had dumped her bags made my skin crawl. I found a heavy winter sleeping bag in my camping gear, took it out to the back deck, and slept on the hard wooden boards under the freezing Idaho stars. It was the best sleep I had gotten in months. The following week was a masterclass in psychological warfare, and my weapon of choice was absolute, impenetrable silence. On Monday morning, precisely at 9 o'clock, Victoria filed the permanent no trespass orders with the county court. On Tuesday, she formally filed a civil suit against Maya, Trevor, and my mother for property damage and trespassing. On Wednesday, she successfully petitioned a judge for a temporary injunction to prevent any of them from coming within 100 yards of my property line. By Thursday, she filed a small claims supplement, meticulously itemizing every single damaged item I had photographed. I charged them for the rug. I charged them for the custom cutting board. I charged them for the wall repair and repainting. I included the invoice for a professional hazardous cleaning service to deep clean the entire house. I charged them for the emergency locksmith who came out to rekey the smart locks a second time, just to be legally bulletproof. I even charged them for the additional security cameras I was installing that very week. And while Victoria was dropping legal bombs on my family in Idaho, my phone began to ring. It started on Friday morning. The reality of the court summons must have finally landed in their mailboxes. My phone rang 14 times that day. I did not pick up a single call. I sat at my kitchen island, drinking coffee, watching the caller ID flash. Maya. Trevor. My mother. Then came calls from numbers I did not recognize. One turned out to be Trevor's mother, leaving a tearful, panicked voicemail begging me to drop the charges because Trevor could not afford a criminal record. I ignored her, too. But there was one voicemail I did not ignore. It was from a Coeur d'Alene area code. I listened to it twice. It was the coworker, the man who had spoken to Deputy Onyekachi at the party. His name was Pendry. He sounded mortified. He left a rambling message apologizing profusely for being at the party, explaining he had no idea the house was not Maya's, and asking if there was anything he could do to help make things right. I called Pendry back within 10 minutes. I thanked him for his integrity. I asked him if he would be willing to put his anger to good use. He agreed instantly. On Saturday, Pendry sat down with Victoria's paralegal and recorded a sworn, notarized affidavit detailing exactly what Maya and Trevor had told the guests. He was not the only one. Two other guests, a married couple who had brought the expensive stand mixer as a housewarming gift, also came forward. In their sworn statement, they testified that Maya had told them she had recently come into a massive financial windfall and had purchased the Lakehouse in cash to give her children a place to grow up by the water. They also formally requested their stand mixer back. Victoria added all three sworn witness statements to our growing legal file. My family was desperately trying to breach my defenses using the only tactic they knew: emotional bombardment. They sent text messages calling me a monster. They sent messages claiming the children were crying because their aunt was trying to put their mother in jail. They deployed every guilt trip in their arsenal. But they were firing blanks against a titanium wall. Every unanswered call, every ignored text was a victory. I was starving them of the one thing they needed to survive, my reaction. The silence was not passive, it was the most aggressive, devastating response I could possibly give them. I was letting them drown in the consequences of their own actions. The first time my mother successfully got through my digital blockade was 11 days after the party. She was getting desperate, so she used a tactic I should have anticipated. She called from a completely unknown number, likely a burner phone or a borrowed device. I was distracted, reviewing a spreadsheet for work, and I answered the call without checking the screen. "Audrey, honey," she said. The moment I heard her voice, the air in my lungs turned to ice. She used that specific, breathless, delicate tone she always adopted when she wanted to soften me up. It was the voice of a fragile, well-meaning mother who was just so overwhelmed by the cruelty of the world. I did not hang up immediately. I wanted to hear it. I wanted to hear exactly how she would try to spin a home invasion into a misunderstanding. "You have to drop this, Audrey," she pleaded, her voice trembling with manufactured tears. "You just have to. Your sister is beside herself. She hasn't slept in a week. Trevor is terrified he's going to lose his job. She didn't mean for it to be like this. We thought you would be excited." I pressed the record button on my phone system, legally protected by the state's one-party consent laws. "You thought I would be excited," I repeated. My voice was a flat, emotionless bass line. "Honey, she just wanted you to share with her," my mother cried. "You have so much. You have this huge, beautiful career. You make so much money. You don't even need that massive house. You're never even there because you travel so much. Maya just wanted the kids to have a weekend on the lake." She was doing it again, weaponizing my success to justify their theft. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my newly repaired quartz island. "Mom," I said, cutting through her tears like a scalpel. "Did you tell the people at that party that the house belonged to Maya?" There was a long, heavy silence on the line. The crying stopped instantly. I might have mentioned that she had been involved in the purchase," she stammered, backtracking. "Was she?" I asked. "Honey, it's complicated. Was she involved in the purchase, Mom? Did she contribute a single dollar to the $462,000 I paid for this property?" "You are being incredibly cruel right now," she snapped, her delicate tone vanishing, replaced by cornered anger. "Did you know she copied my keys while I was taking a shower in your house?" I asked, my voice getting quieter, colder. Another profound silence. "I didn't know about the keys," she whispered. "Did you know about the party?" I asked. "I knew about the party. Did you know it was at my house?" Did you know the party was at my house?" I repeated, spacing each word out with deliberate precision. "Yes," she admitted. "Did you know that I did not know?" She didn't answer. The silence on the phone was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was the sound of a woman realizing that the daughter she had programmed to submit was completely, irrevocably gone. "I will see you in court, Helen," I said, using her first name for the first time in my life. I hung up the phone. I blocked the new number. My pulse was completely steady. In the days leading up to the mandatory legal proceedings, Victoria forwarded me the copies of the police reports and the initial statements my family had given to the deputies on the night of the incident. Reading those documents was like studying the anatomy of a shared psychosis. I realized that the betrayal was not just a spontaneous bad decision, it was a deeply entrenched delusion. My family genuinely believed they were untouchable. In Trevor's official police statement, he had the audacity to write that he assumed I would be reasonable once I cooled down. He actually told a sheriff's deputy, on the record, that he figured I was just having a typical sisterly tantrum and that I would eventually apologize and let them stay for the rest of the month. He viewed my boundaries not as legal facts, but as temporary emotional hurdles to be jumped over. Maya's statement was even more pathological. She claimed she had been planning to surprise me with a co-ownership arrangement. She suggested that she was doing me a favor by breaking into my home, throwing a party with my alcohol, and hanging her clothes in my closet. She wrote, and this is a direct quote from the police file, "Audrey has always known I needed the house more than she did because of the children." She used the word needed 3 times in a single paragraph. But the masterpiece of manipulation came from my mother. Helen told the deputies that Maya had explained everything to her. According to my mother, Maya claimed that I had verbally promised the house to the family during an emotional phone call back in March. My mother stated that I had supposedly told Maya the house was a gift to the children and that they could use it whenever they wanted. They had built a story. They had crafted this elaborate, fictional narrative of my generosity, and they had told it to themselves, to each other, and to 23 guests. They had repeated the lie so many times that it became their truth. They believed, with every fiber of their being, that when I finally came home and saw the balloons and the banner, I would step right into the script they had written for me. They believed the social pressure of the party would force me to smile, play the generous rich aunt, and hand over the keys. It was a brilliant psychological trap. For the old Audrey, it might have even worked. But I am an investigator. When someone presents a claim, I demand the data. I did not argue with their delusion. I simply logged into my cellular provider's portal. I pulled my entire, itemized phone record history for the month of March. I downloaded the PDF, printed it out, and highlighted the dates. In the month of March, I had been in Hawaii, deadheading back from an overseas corporate audit. The phone records proved, unequivocally, that there had been 0 phone calls, 0 text messages, and 0 contact of any kind between my phone number and Maya's phone number for a 20-day window surrounding the alleged promise. There was no phone call. There was no promise. There was only a paper trail of their lies, neatly highlighted in yellow ink, sitting in a manila folder on Victoria's desk. I was armed to the teeth with evidence, and I was ready to bring the entire structure of their delusion crashing to the ground. Idaho's civil procedure requires parties to attempt mediation before a judge will hear a civil suit of this nature. So, in late October, as the leaves in Coeur d'Alene turned brittle and gold, I walked into a sterile conference room in a downtown law office. Victoria was beside me, carrying a briefcase thick with affidavits, police reports, and receipts. My mother showed up wearing a beige cardigan I had bought for her 2 Christmases ago. It was a pathetic, transparent attempt at psychological manipulation. Trevor did not show up at all. He claimed he could not get the time off work, which was cowardice wrapped in an excuse. Maya arrived with a lawyer who looked exhausted before we even sat down. He had the demeanor of a man who was only taking this case as a favor to a friend and deeply regretted his life choices. The mediator was an older gentleman with silver hair and reading glasses hanging from a chain around his neck. He started by explaining the rules of mediation, emphasizing compromise and family healing. I let him speak. I kept my face entirely neutral. Then Maya started. She deployed the classic Darvo tactic: deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. She didn't start with the house, she started with my character. She cried. She cried heavily and loudly. She looked at the mediator and sobbed that I was destroying the family. She claimed I was a vindictive, heartless corporate drone who cared more about money than my own flesh and blood. She said the children were traumatized because I was trying to lock their mother in a cage. She brought up our dead father, claiming he would be ashamed of the monster I had become. She talked for 20 uninterrupted minutes. Victoria shifted next to me, ready to object, but I put a hand on her arm. I had instructed Victoria beforehand, let Maya talk. Let her exhaust her emotional ammunition. When Maya finally wound down, sniffling into a tissue and looking at me with absolute venom, the mediator turned to me. He asked if I had a response or if I was willing to discuss a path forward. I opened my folder. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend my character or mention my dead father. I slid 3 pieces of paper across the polished wooden table. I have exactly one offer, I said, my voice cutting through the stuffy air of the room like a blade. Number 1, they reimburse me for all documented damages, which totals $11,400. Number 2, they sign a permanent, legally binding no contact and no trespass agreement regarding myself and my property. Number 3, Maya issues a written statement, drafted by my attorney, to every single guest who attended that party. The statement will clarify that she does not own the house, has never owned the house, and that any representations to the contrary were entirely fabricated. I paused, letting the demands sink in. If they meet all three conditions, I continued, looking directly into Maya's eyes, I will ask the district attorney to drop the criminal trespass charges. If they refuse even a single clause, we end this mediation right now, we go to trial, and I will push for the absolute maximum sentence on every single count. The mediator blinked. He looked down at the paperwork, then over at Maya's lawyer. Maya's lawyer leaned over and whispered frantically into her ear. He was likely telling her that this was the best deal she was ever going to get, and that my evidence would slaughter her in a courtroom. Maya's face turned bright red. She slammed her hand on the table. I am not signing anything that says I am a liar, she screamed. I am not humiliating myself in front of my friends just because you are a greedy bitch. I nodded slowly. I closed my folder and stood up from the leather chair. I looked at her lawyer. Then I will see you in court, I said. I walked out of the room, leaving my family sitting in the ruins of their own arrogance. The justice system is slow, but when it finally arrives, it is a spectacular thing to witness. We went to court. It took until late February for the criminal and civil dockets to align. By that time, the lake outside my house was frozen solid, blanketed in a foot of pristine, untouched snow. I drove down to the county courthouse in a tailored charcoal suit. I felt nothing but a quiet, resolute anticipation. The trial was a slaughter. Maya's lawyer tried to argue that it was a simple misunderstanding between family members, a case of miscommunication regarding a vacation home. Victoria did not even have to raise her voice to dismantle the defense. She presented the time-stamped photographs of the duplicated keys. She presented the phone records proving there was no verbal agreement in March. She played the affidavits from the deceived guests. She presented the invoice for the warped cutting board and the ruined white rug. It was a masterclass in forensic evidence. The criminal trespass charges held firm. They held against Maya. They held against Trevor. And, though a small, residual part of my inner child fractured as I watched it happen, the charges held against my mother, Helen. The prosecution proved that my mother had been explicitly informed by the deputies on Saturday night that the property was legally mine. Yet, she had attempted to return the following morning with Maya to retrieve their belongings without police escort or my permission. That constituted a secondary trespassing offense. The judge overseeing the sentencing was a woman named Hester. She had been on the bench for 22 years, and she had a face carved out of granite. When it was time for sentencing, she ordered Maya and Trevor to stand. Judge Hester looked down over her glasses, the courtroom so quiet you could hear the hum of the heating vents. "Ma'am," the judge said, directing her gaze entirely at my sister. "What you did here was not a familial misunderstanding. What you did was a calculated, premeditated occupation of another citizen's home. You forged keys. You lied to your community. You caused thousands of dollars in damages. The defense has repeatedly brought up the fact that you are the victim's sister, as if blood relations somehow excuse this behavior. I strongly disagree. The fact that the homeowner is your sister is the aggravating factor in this case, not the mitigating one. You exploited a relationship of trust for your own financial vanity." The gavel came down. The civil suit awarded me damages of $14,200, which included the repairs, the cleaning, the security upgrades, and a portion of my attorney's fees. On the criminal side, the no trespass orders were made permanent. Maya and Trevor avoided jail time, but just barely. They were sentenced to 2 years of strict probation and 300 hours of community service each. My mother received a deferred sentence and a hefty fine. They walked out of that courtroom with criminal records, a massive financial debt they now owed to me, and the absolute destruction of the illusion they had spent decades building. I walked out with my freedom. Actions have consequences, but public lies have an entirely different kind of fallout. When you build your entire social identity on a foundation of deceit, the collapse is never quiet. It is a chain reaction. In the months following the trial, the ripples of the verdict spread through their community in Boise and Coeur d'Alene. I did not have to lift a finger to destroy their reputations. They had already done the heavy lifting themselves. Trevor was the first to face the real-world consequences. The coworker, Pendry, who had given the sworn statement to my lawyer, was deeply embedded in the management structure of the boat dealership where Trevor worked. Once it became clear that Trevor had lied to his colleagues, invited them to a stolen house, and nearly implicated them in a felony trespassing charge, the workplace environment turned incredibly hostile. Trevor was not officially fired for the incident, but he was passed over for a promotion, isolated by his peers, and eventually forced to resign and find work at a much smaller, lower-paying garage. Maya's social circle imploded. The 20-plus guests who had attended the fake housewarming party did not keep the secret. The story of the woman who threw a lavish party in her sister's secret house, only to have the police raid the event and arrest the host, became the ultimate gossip in their suburban circles. Maya tried to spin the narrative, of course. She played the victim. She told anyone who would listen that her rich, cruel sister had set her up and trapped her. Some people believed her. The enablers, the people who shared her toxic worldview, rallied around her and called me a monster. I let them. I did not care. The people who mattered, the people with critical thinking skills, asked the right questions. They asked why Maya had a digitally copied key. They asked why she claimed the house was an inheritance from a man who died penniless 2 decades ago. The people who didn't ask those questions were never going to matter to my life anyway. My mother tried to call me one last time, right after her fines were processed. She left a voicemail, her voice devoid of the usual theatrical tears, replaced by a cold, hollow bitterness. She told me I had successfully broken the family, and that she hoped my empty house kept me warm at night. I listened to the message once, deleted it, and never heard her voice again. I had amputated the infected limb. It hurt. The phantom pain of losing a family is real, and it aches in the quiet moments. But the fever was gone. The constant, draining sickness of their demands, their crises, and their entitlement had vanished from my bloodstream. For the first time in 34 years, my phone was quiet. When it rang, it was a client, a friend, or Arthur asking if I wanted to come over for coffee. The chain reaction of their downfall did not bring me joy, but it brought me peace, which is a far more valuable currency. It has been almost a year since the trial. I am sitting at my quartz island, typing out this account on my laptop. The house smells like fresh pine and the rich, dark roast of coffee brewing in a machine that I bought with my own money. The house is completely restored. The wall in the hallway is pristine again. I hired a local painter, a wonderful guy named Onesimo, to fix the drywall and repaint. He charged me far too little for his excellent work, so I tipped him with $100 bill and a homemade cherry pie. The ruined white rug was thrown in the dumpster and replaced with a dark, woven wool rug that feels warm under my bare feet. The locks have not needed to be changed again. But I did not replace everything. I kept the blue ceramic bowls. The ones that Trevor and Maya had chipped when they carelessly tossed them into the sink during their party. I washed them, dried them, and placed them on the open shelving in my kitchen, right where I can see them every single day. I kept them, chips and all, because I want to remember. I never want to forget what happens when you lower your walls for people who only see you as a resource. Those chipped bowls are my daily reminder that peace requires vigilance. I am not entirely alone here. I adopted a dog, a rescue mix. She is part German Shepherd and part something long and goofy. I named her Pemberley. Every morning at 6 o'clock, she runs the perimeter of the property line, sniffing the trees and barking at the squirrels, guarding this small acre of the world like it is her own personal kingdom. My life is incredibly quiet now. I am not fine in the way that movies portray people after a major victory. I don't throw my hands in the air and dance around the living room. I am fine in a much deeper, more profound way. I am factually, materially, and emotionally fine. The thing that hurts, occasionally, is the absence. I have no mother now. Not because I legally cut her off, but because the woman I needed her to be never actually existed. The woman she actually is cannot be in my life without an audience to perform for, and without a daughter to sacrifice. So, she is gone. I think about my sister's kids sometimes. I think about the 4-year-old drawing on my wall, completely unaware that she was being used as a prop in her mother's grand illusion. I hope that someday, when they are older, someone tells them the true version of why their aunt is not around. But what I gained in exchange for that loss is staggering. I gained the woman who would have gladly eaten fast food alone in her car for another 15 years if that was the price of independence. I gained Tuesday afternoon pie dates with Arthur. I gained a frozen lake, a successful career, and the absolute dignity of a door that locks from the inside. I used to think that the worst thing a family could do is lie to you. I used to think the ultimate betrayal was a stolen car or a copied key. But after watching my sister wear a sash in my living room, after watching my mother drink wine from my cup in a house I bought with 15 years of double shifts and packed lunches, I understand the truth. The worst thing a family can do is decide, quietly and without ever telling you, that your life is a resource for theirs. Every choice they made, the stolen bicycle, the forged car title, the constant demands for money, the copied key, the printed welcome banner, was the natural, inevitable consequence of a story they had been telling themselves for decades. And that story only worked as long as I kept playing my part. The morning I stopped playing, the morning I called the police instead of calling my mother, the story collapsed. That is not cruelty. That is cause and effect. People talk about personal boundaries like they are physical walls you can just build in a single afternoon. They tell you to just set boundaries like it is a magical spell. It is not. Boundaries are decisions you make, one agonizing choice at a time over years. And the cost of not making those decisions compounds the way debt does, quietly, ruthlessly, until one day you are standing in an airport halfway across the world, watching your family steal your sanctuary on a live camera feed. Goodness is not the same thing as compliance. You can love your family and still completely refuse to be consumed by them. Wisdom is the muscle you build when you finally see a pattern for what it truly is. It is not a phase. It is not a misunderstanding. It is a pattern. And strength, the kind of strength that actually holds up under pressure, is rarely loud. It does not throw plates against the wall. It does not scream in a mediation room. Real strength calls an attorney from a hotel room at midnight and says, "I want a no trespass order on the desk by Monday morning." Real strength sleeps in a sleeping bag on a freezing wooden deck because the bed has been violated. Real strength signs the prosecution paperwork, even when the name on the docket is your own mother's. A man at the hardware store told me once that you are never just buying a lock. A lock only buys you time. The rest of your safety, you have to buy yourself. He was right. I bought myself the rest with a phone call to a sheriff, a ruthless attorney, and the willingness to walk away from the only family I ever had. I would do it again. I would do it exactly the same way. The lake outside my window is frozen solid now. Pemberley is asleep on the dark wool rug. I am drinking my coffee in the silence of my own house, knowing that no one will walk through that door unless I invite them. I paid for this peace in dollars, yes. But I also paid for it in the harder currency of grief, discipline, and absolute resolve. I bought this life in silence. And I get to keep it in silence, too.